It is the middle of the day in the steep, rocky pass of Beth Horon, and 5 kings of the Amorites are fleeing for their lives, under a sky raining down stones of ice. A Hebrew general stands breathless on the ridge, looking out over the slaughter, but he is not watching the enemy. He looks up at the burning disk of the sun over Gibeon, and the pale ghost of the moon hanging over the valley of Ajalon. He speaks a single, impossible word to the sky, a command not to pause, but to shut its mouth. Picture it. The dust, the blood, the lethal hail shattering the Canaanite armor. Joshua 10:12 inches. The King James Version reads, "Then spake Joshua to the Lord in the day when the Lord delivered up the Amorites before the children of Israel. And he said in the sight of Israel, Sun, stand thou still upon Gibeon, and thou, moon, in the valley of Ajalon." Stop right there. The English translation gives us a cosmic pause button. Stand thou still. But pull back the English and look at the ancient Hebrew underneath. The word Joshua shouts into the storm is dom. It does not mean to linger. It does not mean to wait. It means to be mute, to be utterly, deathly silent. He is telling the loudest, most dominant forces in the ancient sky to shut up. Why command a burning star to be silent? And why does the canonical Bible deliberately point us to a lost, uncanonized scroll? Just to prove this terrifying suspension of time actually happened? See the scene. 2 celestial bodies, locked in their ancient orbits, freezing in place over a Canaanite slaughterhouse. And then the biblical text does something jarring. It steps out of its own narrative. It hands you a footnote to a ghost text. Joshua 10:13 continues, "And the sun stood still, and the moon stayed, until the people had avenged themselves upon their enemies." Is not this written in the book of Jasher? "So the sun stood still in the midst of heaven, and hasted not to go down about a whole day." Read that again. The book of Jasher, the book of the upright, a physical scroll, referenced directly by the writer of the canonical Bible. A scroll pointing the reader outside the bounds of what we call scripture to confirm the day the mechanics of the universe broke down. We read right past it. But the text is demanding we look at an ancient record we no longer hold in our hands to verify an impossible event. You have been taught this miracle was just an extended afternoon, a convenience of extra daylight so Israel could finish a war before dark. But the sky was not just providing a lamp, it was submitting to an arrest warrant. To understand what actually froze over the valley of Ajalon, we have to look at what those celestial bodies meant to the bleeding men on the ground. We have a silenced sun, a frozen moon, and a canonical footnote pointing to a lost scroll. But before we track down what the book of Jasher recorded, we have to look closely at the armies dying in the hail. What exactly were the Amorites worshipping when the sky suddenly refused to move? The valley of Ajalon is bleeding. 5 kings from Jerusalem, Hebron, Jarmuth, Lachish, and Eglon are breaking rank, fleeing toward the caves at Makkedah. They are desperate for the safety of nightfall. But they cannot hide in the dark, because the dark refuses to come. Look up at the sky over that slaughter. We read Joshua 10 and assume the miracle is about battlefield logistics. Israel just needed more time on the clock to finish the fight before sunset. But that is a modern, mechanical mind projecting onto an ancient, supernatural war. Picture it. To the Amorite coalition running for their lives, the glowing disk over Gibeon was not a ball of gas. It was Shamash, the sun god, the sovereign judge of the heavens. And the pale sphere over Ajalon was Yari, the moon god. These were the high powers of the Canaanite pantheon. Remember the very first city Israel annihilated when they crossed the Jordan, Jericho. The name itself is rooted in Yariach, the city of the moon god. Stay with me. The Amorites marched into battle, trusting the sky to fight for them. Targum Jonathan, the ancient Aramaic translation and expansion of the prophets, pulls back the veil on this exact idolatry. I offer it as that one tradition's record, kept alive in the synagogues of the 1st century. The Targum indicates that the Amorites were masters of celestial sorcery. They worshipped the hosts of heaven. They calculated their conquests by the movement of the stars and the cycles of the moon. Now, watch what the text does. Joshua does not look at the ground. He looks up. Joshua 10:12 reads, "Sun, stand thou still upon Gibeon, and thou, moon, in the valley of Ajalon." He does not ask God for more light. He speaks directly to the luminaries. He tells the gods of the Amorites to halt. He arrests them. He turns them into prisoners of war. Sit with that. The Amorites look up through the falling stones of ice and see their deities paralyzed, stripped of their movement, stripped of their power. The sun they worshipped is now the very spotlight exposing them to the swords of Israel. The moon they revered is pinned against the atmosphere like a captive. It is a public, cosmic execution of the Canaanite pantheon. But the writer of Joshua knew how impossible this sounded. A human general commanding the architecture of heaven to freeze. So the canonical text inserts a sudden, jarring footnote. Joshua 10:13 interrupts the battle to say, "Is not this written in the book of Jasher, the book of the upright?" A physical scroll, a historical ledger. The Bible is pointing us outside of its own borders to prove the mechanics of this miracle. It is telling the ancient reader, if you do not believe the sky can be chained, go read the scroll of Jasher. We do not have that original text in our modern Bibles, but fragments of its tradition survived. And the ancient Jewish mind knew exactly what that book contained regarding the weapons of heaven. The sun is frozen, the moon is captive, and the Amorite gods are publicly defeated. But the canonical text refuses to let us move on without pointing us to a ghost scroll, a record that kept the precise details of how the universe was halted. What exactly did the lost book of Jasher record about the true mechanics of this impossible day? Look past the bleeding Amorites in the pass of Beth Horon. Look past the stones of ice still melting into the Canaanite mud. Look at the parchment. The miracle of the frozen sky is so massive, so structurally impossible, that the canonical text refuses to let it stand on its own without a second witness. Joshua 10:13 commands the reader to consult the book of Jasher, a text that vanished into the dust of antiquity, a physical scroll, rolled and sealed, holding the tactical records of Yahweh's wars. But this is not the only time our Bible demands we look at this missing scroll. Fast forward 400 years. 2 Samuel 1:18. David is weeping over the bodies of Saul and Jonathan, slaughtered on Mount Gilboa. The King James Version reads, "Also he bade them teach the children of Judah the use of the bow. Behold, it is written in the book of Jasher." Stop right there. Read that again. Same lost scroll. Same name. Look at the two events this ghost text anchors. In 2 Samuel, it is a manual for the bow, a weapon of earth, held in the hands of men. But in Joshua 10, it is the record of the sun and the moon freezing in their tracks over a battlefield. The weapons of heaven. The Hebrew word yashar translates simply to upright. The Book of the Upright. It was not just a title, it was a classification. Ancient Jewish rabbinic tradition, debated for centuries, by the sages in Talmudic texts like Tractate Avodah Zarah, argued over what this physical scroll actually contained. Some rabbis insisted it was simply a title for the book of Genesis, the ledger of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the original upright men. Others held it was a dedicated war chronicle, a lost military ledger recording the exact moments the supernatural bled into the physical to defend Israel. I hold this as their telling, not as proven fact. but the framing is critical. Picture the archive where such a scroll was kept. The ink on that parchment recorded things too terrifying for normal history. The canonical Bible uses this lost text to tell the ancient reader something specific. The frozen sky over Gibeon was not a metaphor. It was not poetic license. It was a documented, verifiable military maneuver, recorded in the same physical book that taught human soldiers how to string a bow, reading, not inventing. But to command a star to stop, you have to understand what a star actually is. When we read Joshua 10, our modern minds picture a ball of burning gas and a barren rock caught in gravitational pull. That is not what the Hebrew general saw. That is not what the Canaanite kings saw. And that is not what the ancient Jewish authors believed was operating over the valley of Ajalon. To understand how a human voice could halt the mechanics of the sky, we have to look at the machinery itself. If the book of Jasher recorded the event, another ancient text recorded the engine. Who or what was actually driving the sun across the firmament before Joshua told it to shut its mouth? Look up again from the blood-soaked ridge of Beth Horon. The hail has stopped, but the sun is locked in place over Gibeon. Joshua 10:12 tells us the human general spoke directly to the sun and the moon. But to the ancient Jewish mind, reading this text, he was not screaming at a ball of burning gas. He was addressing the drivers. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, sealed in jars in the caves of Qumran 2,000 years ago, archaeologists found fragments of a massive ancient cosmological map. First Enoch, an ancient Jewish writing preserved whole in the Ethiopian Bible, contains an entire section devoted to the mechanics of the sky. It is called the Book of the Heavenly Luminaries. Test it the way the Bereans tested everything, but sit with this ancient world view. It changes the battlefield completely. First Enoch chapters 72 through 75 map a mechanical, militarized heaven. It describes the sun and moon emerging from massive celestial gates at the edges of the earth. These luminaries do not wander. They march. They ride in brilliant chariots, propelled by specific, appointed winds, and they do not move alone. They are commanded by powerful angelic sentinels. Uriel, the holy angel appointed over the stars, holds the schedule. He ensures the sun never drops its pace, and the moon never misses its phase. Picture it. If you read the canonical text through this Enochian lens, Joshua is not asking the physical universe to simply hit pause. He is looking up at the chariot of the sun and issuing a direct, overriding command to the spiritual entity holding the reins. Go back to the canonical anchor. Joshua 10:12. Sun, stand thou still upon Gibeon. Stop right there. Remember that strange Hebrew word dom. Be silent. Cut the noise. If the sun is just a sphere of helium and hydrogen, silence makes no sense. A rock cannot make noise. A ball of gas does not speak, but a chariot does. A rushing wind driving a celestial vehicle roars across the firmament, and an angelic intelligence holding the reins understands a military command. Same sky, different architecture. Joshua is issuing a cease and desist to the spiritual entities steering the Amorite gods. He is telling the chariots of the sun and the moon to cut their engines. He commands the roar of the celestial machinery to be mute. Watch what the text does. The luminaries obey. The wheels stop turning. The wind dies down. The sky goes deathly, unnaturally still over the slaughter. The Amorites, who built their entire religious empire on the movement of these stars, are forced to watch their gods submit to a Hebrew general. It is not just an extended afternoon. It is a hostile takeover of the heavens. But freezing the sky breaks the natural order. A suspended sun is a lethal weapon. When the chariots stop, the light does not just linger, it burns. What happens to the Earth when the cosmic clock refuses to tick forward? And who else in the canonical record remembered the terror of this frozen light? The blood is long dried in the pass of Beth Horon. Centuries have passed since the 5 kings of the Amorites were dragged from the caves at Makkedah. But the memory of that unnatural sky is still burning in the mind of a Hebrew prophet. He is standing in Judah, looking back at the martial history of Yahweh, tracing the exact moments the Creator weaponized the earth against his enemies. And his mind goes straight to the valley of Ajalon. Habakkuk 3. 11 inches, the King James Version reads, "The sun and moon stood still in their habitation. At the light of thine arrows they went, and at the shining of thy glittering spear." Stop right there. Read that again. This is not a description of an extended, helpful afternoon. This is the language of artillery. Look at the Hebrew word the prophet uses for where the sun and moon stopped: habitation. The word underneath the English is Zebul. It does not mean a casual resting place or a temporary tent. It means a lofty, exalted fortress, the high palace of the sky. The Amorite gods were locked in their own towering fortress, turned into captive floodlights for an earthly slaughter. Same sky, same execution. But Habakkuk adds a terrifying detail that Joshua's narrative only implies. The light itself became a weapon. At the light of thine arrows they went, and at the shining of thy glittering spear. Picture it. The sun is pinned against the firmament, directly overhead at Gibeon. It does not set. It does not cool. The brutal, unforgiving heat of the midday sun is sustained for hours upon hours over a desert valley. We read the Joshua account and imagine Israel fighting in a pleasant, perfectly lit twilight. That is a sanitized reading. A suspended sun means suspended heat. I offer it as that, one reading of the physics of this miracle. But consider the reality of a stationary star. The canopy of heaven becomes a magnifying glass. The Amorite coalition is not just being hunted by Hebrew swords and shattered by hail. They are being roasted alive under the unblinking, inescapable glare of their own chief deity. The very god they worshipped for victory, Shamash, the solar judge, is now a glittering spear pressed against their necks. This is why the book of Jasher had to record it. That lost scroll of the upright was a military ledger, keeping the history of the weapons of heaven. Habakkuk confirms what Jasher knew. The suspended sun was not a lamp to guide the way. It was a siege engine brought to bear against the kings of the earth. Watch what the text does. The celestial mechanics were hijacked to break the physical will of the Canaanite armies. The sky was fully weaponized, but a hijacked sky cannot stay frozen forever. The wheels of the ancient clock must eventually turn, and the chariots must finally be released from their tether. What happens when the silence of that single Hebrew word is finally lifted, and the sun is permitted to drop beneath the horizon of a permanently altered world? The silence finally breaks over the valley of Ajalon, and the pale disk of the moon begins to slide out of its captivity. The sky cools. The blood on the stones of Beth Horon goes black in the falling dark. After hours of artificial, agonizing noon, the chariots of the firmament are released, and night finally reclaims the Canaanite desert. But before the dark fell, something profound happened in the dirt. Picture it. Joshua 10:16 records the movements of the Amorite royalty while the sky was still frozen. But these 5 kings fled and hid themselves in a cave at Makkedah. Stop right there. Sit with that. These are the 5 kings of the Amorite coalition, masters of celestial sorcery, men who built their thrones, their altars, and their military strategies on the cycles of Shamash the sun and Yari the moon. And where are they during the greatest celestial event in human history? They are hiding from it. The very light they worshipped has been weaponized against them. The sun is a glittering spear pressing down on the battlefield. The Amorite monarchs cannot bear the blinding glory of their own defeated god, so they crawl into a hole in the earth. They seek the absolute, lightless black of a Canaanite cave just to escape the sky. A cave. Not a fortress, not a chariot, a grave. While the kings of the earth cower in the dark, the canonical text delivers a terrifying summary of what just happened above them. Joshua 10:14 inches, the King James Version reads, "And there was no day like that before it or after it, that the Lord hearkened unto the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel." Read that again. Look at the power dynamic in that verse. We are accustomed to the prophets of the Old Testament receiving orders from heaven. God speaks, the prophet obeys, heaven commands, earth submits. Same God, same covenant. But here, the flow of authority runs backward. The Lord hearkened unto the voice of a man. The Hebrew word used here is shama. It means to hear intelligently, to yield, to grant a request. The human general standing on the ridge of Beth Horon issued an operational command to the architecture of the sky, and the sovereign God of the universe signed the authorization. I hold this as one reading, not the final word, but if first Enoch's angelic sentinels were holding the luminaries in place, they did not halt simply because a man yelled at them. They held their chariots because the voice of that man was instantly backed by the throne room of heaven. The book of Jasher had to record this day because it violated every known rule of celestial mechanics and divine hierarchy. It was the day a man spoke a word of silence, and God made the angels enforce it. The cosmic clock is ticking again, but the earth is fundamentally changed. The kings who worship the stars are huddled in the dark, waiting for the men who commanded them. What happens when the physical bodies of the Amorite rulers are dragged out of the cave into the fading light? The heavy stones are rolled away from the mouth of the cave at Makkedah. The blinding, suspended light of the afternoon has finally begun to fracture, casting the long, bruised shadows of evening across the Canaanite rock. 5 kings are dragged blinking into the fading light, stripped of their armor, forced to their knees in the dirt before the Hebrew general who just commanded their gods to freeze. See the scene. The men who ruled Jerusalem, Hebron, Jarmuth, Lachish, and Eglon are trembling in the dust. Joshua 10:24 inches. The King James reads, "And it came to pass, when they brought out those kings unto Joshua, that Joshua called for all the men of Israel, and said unto the captains of the men of war which went with him, Come near, put your feet upon the necks of these kings. And they came near, and put their feet upon the necks of them." Stop right there. Look at the physical posture, the neck pressed into the earth, the foot of the conqueror pinning the spine. This is not just a military execution. It is a theological reversal. These are the Amorites. To the ancient Jewish mind reading the text, they were not just another Canaanite tribe occupying land. They were the remnant of something much darker. Look at how the prophet Amos remembers this exact bloodline centuries later. Amos 2-9 describes the Amorite enemy like this: "Yet destroyed I the Amorite before them, whose height was like the height of the cedars, and he was strong as the oaks. Yet I destroyed his fruit from above, and his roots from beneath." Read that again. The height of cedars, strong as oaks. The Amorite bloodline carried the genetic echo of the giants, the Nephilim remnants spanning back to the days before the flood. In the ancient Jewish framework, these tribes were deeply tied to the Watchers, the fallen angels who taught mankind the secrets of the stars, the movements of the luminaries, and the sorcery of the sky. I hold this as one reading of the ancient texts, not the final word, but the Jewish writers understood this war was not just territorial, it was a cosmic cleanup operation. These 5 kings built their empires looking up. They practiced the forbidden stargazing handed down from Mount Hermon. They worshipped the high places, the celestial chariots of Shamash. the wandering stars. They trusted the fruit from above to secure their reign. And so, Joshua did not just defeat them with Hebrew swords. He dismantled their entire cosmology. He froze their sky, turning their highest source of worship into a burning, silent prison. Same sun, same dirt. Now, the Enochian chariots of the firmament have been forced to stand down, and the giant-blooded kings of the earth are forced to eat the dust. The highest architecture of heaven and the lowest dirt of Makkedah have both been conquered in a single afternoon. The fruit from above is destroyed, and the roots from beneath are severed. Watch what the text does. Joshua does not kill them from a distance. He makes his captains walk up and physically step on their necks. He is forcing his men to feel the pulse of the Amorite kings, to know that the towering giants are just flesh, and the star worshippers bleed like anyone else. But the bodies cannot stay in the light. The long day is finally ending, and the sun that stood still is finally permitted to sink below the horizon, demanding a final act of burial before the dark takes over. What happens to the cave of Makkedah when the longest day in human history finally gives way to night? Go back now to the pass of Beth Horon where this film began. The bleeding valley, the melting stones of ice, the Hebrew general standing breathless on the ridge. You have read that scene 100 times, imagining a helpful, extended afternoon where Israel just needed a few more hours of daylight. But look up at the burning disk over Gibeon and the pale ghost of the moon over Ajalon, and you see them for what they really were: captives. The sky was not a lamp, it was a weapon. The ancient Hebrew word dom was not a request to pause. It was an arrest warrant, a command of absolute silence issued to the Enochian chariots driving the firmament. The lost book of Jasher recorded this not as a weather anomaly, but as a hostile takeover of the high places. The Amorites trusted the mechanics of heaven to fight for them, and the God of Israel forced their celestial gods to freeze in place, turning their highest source of worship into a burning, silent prison. Picture it. As the command is finally lifted, the wheels of heaven begin to turn again. The longest, most agonizing day in human history bleeds into dusk. Joshua 10:27 inches. The King James Version records the final act. And it came to pass, at the time of the going down of the sun, that Joshua commanded, and they took them down off the trees, and cast them into the cave wherein they had been hid, and laid great stones in the cave's mouth, which remain until this very day. Stop right there. Same cave, same darkness. The giant-blooded kings of the Amorites tried to hide the frozen, blinding glory of their hijacked sun. Now, as that sun finally sets, and the Enochian sentinels are released to continue their march, the kings are thrown back into the blackness permanently. The earth is sealed over them. The theological reversal is complete. The men who worship the heights of heaven are buried in the dirt, and the God who... We understand now why the canonical text demanded a second witness. The event was so structurally terrifying, so disruptive to the ancient cosmos, that it required the Book of the Upright to verify the physics of the suspension. We know what the Hebrew generals shouted, and we know exactly who the Amorite sorcerers were bowing to. But the physical scroll of Jasher itself is still missing. Where did that archive go? Who guarded the ledger of Yahweh U2019's wars before it vanished from the earth entirely? The desert is still holding the rest. I offer this as one reading of the ancient mechanics, not the final word. But I am handing you the text and letting you sit with the terror of that silenced sky. If you made it to the end of this study, comment the word "watched," so I know who is tracking with these ancient texts. Subscribe to the channel, because we are pulling the lost scrolls out of the dust and reading the canon through the eyes of the men who wrote it. And send this video to one person who loves the Old Testament but has never heard the true mechanics of Joshua. U2019S Frozen Sky. The sun is moving again, but the stones at the mouth of the cave are still there.